So our final presenter is Candy Martinez. She has a PhD in Latin American and Latino studies from the University of California, and she is a first-generation college student. She's currently a UC President's postdoc at UCLA in the Department of World Arts and Cultures and Dance. And the title of Candy's presentation is Embodying Traumatic Wounds and Validating Indigenous Mixtec Healing Practices Through Film. Welcome, Candy.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated being here, and I also appreciate the organizing and the participation. People have been so friendly and cordial and asking like really great questions. So I'm happy to be here. Saksil Shjosh Iptu Rbes Iptu Re. My name is Candy Martinez. My roots are Zapoteco, and I'm currently in the unceded territory of the Ngarabal, Tongva and Kizh Nation peoples. I'm not going to read my presentation again, but I have it right here. And in this presentation, I'm going to discuss the sensitive topics of gender violence and sexual abuse. I'm not a Mixtec speaker, so if I mispronounce anything, please correct me. I'll go ahead and begin. Within Indigenous communities in Oaxaca, Mexico, one might observe that candles are placed in a congested intersection or a town entrance. Community members acknowledge the effective quality of being in crossroads, spaces where diverse beings and memories overlap. In the films Nudo Mixteco, which means Mixtec not in English, and Tiempo de Lluvia, which means in times of rain, intersections are social barriers, traumatic wounds, and opportunities for interconnecting. Indigenous women in Nudo Mixteco and Tiempo de Lluvia confront poverty and gender violence in the cities that they migrate to and in their hometowns. Their identities are complex. They are migrants, single mothers, bisexual, rebellious, and meaningful members of their communities. Challenging frameworks of inequality that universalize experience of women across the globe, academic scholars have called for an intersectional framework of inequality that differentiates Indigenous women's class, race, and gender struggles. Intersectionality refers to an assessment of the multiple institutions and identities that inform people's inequalities and privileges. One of its purposes is to analyze inequality beyond single axis categories. The films Nudo Mixteco and Tiempo de Lluvia also validate the need to distinguish and connect those realities of Indigenous women. In this first part of this talk, I'll argue that intersectional inequalities of Mixtec women are linked to the colonial institution of the church and result in individual and collective traumatic wounds as depicted in Nudo Mixteco. In the second part, I will illustrate how collective healing reveals parts of the plot. Collective healing in Tiempo de Lluvia is useful for Mixtec women who navigate intersectional barriers. And I'm going to reveal parts of the plot, but I hope that does not discourage you from watching the films on your own. Directed by the Mixtec filmmaker Ángeles Cruz, Nudo Mixteco is a fictional, non-linear, multi-narrative film. The protagonists are three working-class Mixtec women, Maria, Chavela, and Tonia, from San Mateo, a rural Catholic and Mixtec town. Though their problems involve distinct themes and there appears to be no biological relation among the three, their lives share common struggles. They break away from damaging gender norms in their community, and their deviance is met with resistance and punishment. The film director's usage of frequent shadows cast on the protagonists' faces stresses ambiguity in their lives and in their decisions. Yet this ambiguity is juxtaposed with Catholicism imposing hegemonic power. Nudo Mixteco shows that Catholic principles are not questioned or challenged, even though they have and they continue to produce harm. Catholic customs and practices mesh in the background. The course of the events takes place during a patron saint holiday and a funeral, a time in which community members show their devotion to a patron saint by playing music, assisting mass, eating traditional food, and decorating their town with religious adornment. In the community of San Mateo, Catholicism is tied to the patriarchal values involving sexual intolerance, guilt, and virgin whore dichotomies. Maria's father rejects her sexual orientation, and he tells her that she is the culprit of her mother's death. Community members encouraged Chavela to remain with Esteban, an abusive partner who suddenly returns to Mexico after migrating to the United States for a few years. Meanwhile, Doña's mother discourages her from denouncing her uncle for sexually abusing her and her daughter. When Maria, Doña, and Chavela challenge patriarchal systems, they experience shame during an assembly meeting in which community members decide the fate of Esteban and Chavela. Women reprimand Chavela for not waiting for Esteban because he went to the United States for work. One woman tells Chavela that she needed to stay home to take care of the house and not fool around with another man. A severe punishment for defiant women includes territorial dispossession. For instance, Doña's mother, Lipa, asks Doña and her daughter to leave her home after Doña tells her mother that she will report her uncle to the authorities for sexual violence. Meanwhile, as part of settling their domestic dispute, Chavela and Esteban's mother are stripped away from their home, even though Esteban has not lived in the home for years and has not contributed to the yearly community service called Tequio. The neglect and physical violence that Doña, Maria, and Chavela experience results in traumatic memories. In a Western psychological sense, trauma refers to a mental blockage and/or repressed emotions from a terrible event. To Indigenous feminists, trauma is an ability to relate to one's family, the land one inhabits, and the cosmos. The film's title, Nudo Mixteco, combines two aspects of individual and collective trauma. It refers to individuals' mental state of being stuck and individuals' inability to trust people who care for them. It also refers, though, to the dissension that may rise in small, tight-knit communities. There are a few scenarios of individual trauma depicted in the film. For instance, Doña, who is a single mother, shown right here, and a vendor at a flea market in Mexico City, goes back to her hometown after she intuitively feels that something is wrong. Her psychosomatic symptoms manifest when she sees her uncle with her daughter. Another protagonist in the film, Maria, a household cleaner in Mexico City, returns to San Mateo to attend her mother's funeral. During the funeral wake, she's reprimanded by her father and she's overcome with self-doubt, such that after she reunites with her lover in her hometown, she decides to return to Mexico City by herself, thereby aborting her original plans to take her along. Besides the depiction of protagonists' vulnerable moments, the film also acknowledges that an entire community, not just individuals, could be inhibited by destructive colonial norms. San Mateo's community social fragmentation is apparent during a municipal meeting regarding the domestic dispute between Esteban and Chavela. Debting for opportunities for empathy there, community members don't listen to each other's grievances, and they leave out a discussion of the circumstances that people experience as they relate to challenging social roles, migration, responsibilities, and past traumas. During that meeting, there's an insistence that people must keep to themselves and not question the institutions that shape their conditions. However, the interdependency between women's lives is discernible to the film viewers through the film director's narrative techniques involving the backtracking of time and dramatic irony. Whereas Nudo Mixteco delves on the impact of intersectional inequality and colonial institutions, Tiempo de Lluvia looks at the benefit of Indigenous healing for Mixtec women who endure multiple struggles. Directed by Dr. Itandeo E. Jansen, the fictional film centers the role of Soledad, a healer and a midwife from the Mixtec community of Santiago Apuala, who mediates the societal problems of multiple community members. Besides guiding members of her community, she also navigates her interpersonal problems involving her migrant daughter, Adela, who experiences domestic violence from her partner, Chucho. Historically speaking, ritual specialists and healers in Oaxaca practice rituals for the collective benefit of its community members. With the rise of Spanish colonization, ritual specialists' authority was diminished. Catholic authorities publicly shamed and physically hit Indigenous women who were caught practicing Indigenous rituals. However, Soledad's engagement in what Joseph Gahn calls other than human guidance and relational processes defies the erasure of Indigenous epistemologies and wellness. Soledad's diagnostic rituals and cleanses, for instance, involve medicinal plants and eggs that absorb negative maladies and identify the roots of one's problems. Her engagement with other than humans is especially apparent when she consults maize for divination, a healing practice that could be traced to the 16th century in Mesoamerica and continues to be practiced in Oaxaca to this day. Within Indigenous communities, maize is a sentient being who knows and hears all. It is used as a tool for diagnosing and solving problems. While she's kneeling down, seen in this picture here, Soledad picks several pieces of maize from 2 wooden cups and throws them into the wooden board. The maize helps her identify her daughter's strife, and consequently, she decides to call her daughter to confirm her concerns. In different occasions, Soledad engages in relational processes when she heals community members and her family. Though Soledad engages in physical examinations and bandaging wounds, she treats the healing process of her patients as more than a physical recovery. She incorporates their fears as a process of working through. She facilitates their process of belonging and relating to people and non-human sentient beings. Collective healing is more than an admiration or a reflection of nature, though. It involves decentering individual knowledge and power. The relational process itself is an act of grounding oneself in the knowledge of Indigenous ancestors. For Mixtec and other Indigenous peoples, hills are respected spaces where divination, healing rituals, and offerings are made. On the top of the hills, Mixtecs may make offerings to stones called Nu'un. That means stones of adoration in Mixteco, in exchange for rain. Stones and rain embody meaningful elements for Mixtec communities. Like maize, stones are sentient beings too. They embody the heart of the town, and they can punish humans who disrespect them. Meanwhile, rain is more than a resource. It constitutes Mixtec belonging. After all, the namesake of Mixtec peoples, Nusavi, means people of the rain. Whether they are maize, rain, or stone, sentient beings enable Mixtecs with a sense of belonging and responsibility among themselves and the territories they inhabit. Rituals are processes for communicating with life sources, and they're especially relevant for Indigenous people who are far away, estranged, or disconnected. After Soledad's daughter, Adela, leaves with her son to Mexico City, Soledad engages in a ritual that permits her to process her sadness and protect her daughter from harm. She fills a bottle with water from the turquoise Apuala waterfall and carries it along with yellow and red flowers to a hill, surrounded by rocks formed in a circle. With her legs kneeled down in the middle of the circle, she takes a deep breath, she pours water, and she places the flowers on the floor. The flowers in the water are an offering, and Soledad makes a pedimiento, that is a plea, to the caretakers of the land. The ritual that Soledad performs is more than a prayer for her daughter's well-being. It's an act of claiming her as a Mixtec community member. The omniscient drone shot shown in the film that follows Soledad's invocation illustrates the physical distance, and this is where Soledad is in that drone shot and her son, between her hometown in Apuala and Mexico City. This high angle shot shows Adela and her son walk past the Puente de Cibeles. That is a fountain that is a replica of the Spanish fountain in Madrid. Although Adela adapts to city life and rejects her rural hometown when she tells her friends that the countryside has nothing to offer for her, her mother pronounces her Mixtec affiliation. I'm going to go ahead and end here. The knot in Nudo Mixteco does not refer to Mixtec communities' perpetual or innate state of being stuck. The knot refers to a multi-directional movement or space that requires paying attention to different perspectives and breaking away from colonial demonization. Anthropologist of colonial Mexico, Luis Burkhardt, explains that Nahua cosmovisions consider crossroads as sites of healing when misdeeds are acknowledged. And I'm also thinking too of like the presentations by Lisa Black and the curators today and scholars today, Danielle and Kat, who were talking about, these blankets, these baskets that were turned into like art from such painful memories. And this film too, these two films too are a type of metaphysical alchemy. They imagine what it might mean for Indigenous communities to transform their intersectional struggles to mutual cooperation. And I'm also thinking too of Kim Tallbear's work yesterday on biocultural hope and radical hope. And I really think that this is also talking about that resistance and hope and imagination. And we can see that in these films. In Nudo Mixteco, neighbors offer Chabela with shelter when her abusive husband returns to Mexico. People voluntarily take the time to attend a municipal meeting, which in Oaxaca can probably take 6 hours. And Tonia asks her daughter for forgiveness. En tiempo de lluvia, Soledad helps non-family members heal their traumas and reconcile with their family members. Healing then is not entirely a personal process, but it's dependent on people's willingness to untangle the messiness of inequality and violence. It also calls for the prevention of intersectional injustice for the survival and thrival of Indigenous women, recognizing the life sources that sustain their physical and emotional wellness. And this is a work in progress. I appreciate your comments and your questions. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Candy. That was really beautiful. I have just a question about when you said she gives an offering to the caretakers of the land. Did you mean to the Indigenous people, or did you mean to like the spirit presence?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think also my mentor right now is David Delgado Shorter. And he wrote an article on spiritualities, which kind of problematizes the term spiritualities, because I think that oftentimes Indigenous people are like equated with their religion and so I'm starting to use spiritualities less, thinking that I think for like the idea of sentient beings is that people, or that we shouldn't think about things that we might otherwise not think of as like beings, like our equals. And so in thinking about spiritualities, I think I think that the caretakers of the land, they in Oaxaca, they might be used as chaneques, which is another term that's used like famously. And it refers to kind of like, it could be referred to a lot of things. It could refer to like kind of beings that exist in the land, that protect and oversee the land. And that if you enter those spaces, and if you offend those spaces, something bad will happen to you. And sometimes it is influenced by religion, because I think that people make Catholic prayers to those spaces. And so, how do I distinguish what people, the terms that people use? They might probably use the word spirituality to say, there's a God, or Catholic God is taking care of the land, versus like, is it actually a more kind of decolonial way of that I'm framing? So I think I don't know if I would exactly know like what it means for those Mixtec peoples. It depends, and especially for this woman. But it's something important to note though, is that Soledad, the healer, she takes like at this time where she's experiencing this intense conflict of sadness because her daughter is moving to Mexico City, and also worry for her well-being as a domestic violence survivor. She takes a candle to the church and she makes a prayer there. But then this practice is also juxtaposed with her act of going to this respectful place on the top of the hill, and asking for an offering, which I interpret that as that not necessarily being a Catholic religious rite, but as a very much rite of acknowledging the land, the beings that are there, and it being kind of more of an interconnective moment rather than one necessarily that is kind of like, or I don't know if I would call it religious or spiritual, because of like that, I think because of how I'm being trained to rethink things. But I will say that I think it has to do a lot with retaking the Mixtec identity, which it's interesting to note that in this town, Santiago Apuala, like it's said that the Mixtec peoples originate from that town, right? And so I think to call somebody by their name and to say, the caretaker, take care of them, it means that they belong to that space. And that even though the migrant daughter doesn't want to recognize her Indigenous identity, her mom will remind her of that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for a beautiful presentation. I felt like I traveled to many places when you were speaking. And it also gave me a sense of home again, that we as Indigenous scholars often miss when we're at conferences like this, like thinking about the land again. And again, mine is just more of a comment and maybe an opportunity to share. When I started to reconnect with our Indigenous knowledge, our traditional knowledge, I was told by my mother that it's always been passed on in very subtle ways. From when my mother grew up in a 2-room home with 15 brothers and sisters, and they had no running water or electricity. They had to chop wood at 4 a.m. to get the wood stove burning, and then get the water from the lake and haul it in. And they were always taught to offer tobacco to the water that they were, and it was just something they did, but it was never relayed to them that they were actually giving thanks to that water that gives us life. And that's part of our knowledge, but that's sort of the strength of women being able to pass on our ways of giving thanks to the land without calling it that, right? So I think our traditions are so powerfully passed through the women in the best ways that they could. And so when there was a disconnect from my mother's generation to my generation of the passing of the knowledge because of the inability to speak the language, but also because our ceremonies were outlawed too. They burned the medicines in front of the women and said, you can no longer talk about this or pass it or teach it or share it or whatever. So people went in hiding to do that. And the thing that I just want to share a commonality is you talk about corn, maize, offering that to give thanks to the land. We do that with tobacco in our area. And I think there's so much opportunity for us to do more research to share, not just in terms of sharing it academically, but from our communities to talk about, because that is a very sacred thing we do, are those offerings. So I just, wanted to thank you again for your beautiful presentation and for all the nourishment it provided me.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate those comments. And I was also going to share that I'm actually thinking about, I want to continue the work on sharing how knowledge on such a sensitive and respectful topic can be shared among healers and also youth. And this presentation wasn't really related to what my dissertation was about, which I just completed in June, but it is like a continuation of it. It actually has to do with kind of more sensitive information regarding plants, rituals, and I want to kind of organize it. And I want spaces where people can actually share and exchange information. And I really appreciate the kind of intercultural aspect of this conference too, because I'm learning so much about different groups that I wouldn't have otherwise learned. But yeah, I think sharing is needed. I think also there is, neoliberal appropriation, marketing, which I'm very much wary of and conscious of. And I don't want to be implicit of that. But I also think there needs to be more like sharing among youth and generations too, and migrant generations too, across different places.
I was also just going to say that the films are on my watch list now. So thank you for that. I'm excited to watch.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Candy. I thought about when you just mentioned sharing and Lorena, I was struck that the first film is on HBO Max. So I'm wondering, what does this mean actually when such a film kind of is available, accessible via this venue, but how does this change the context for the film? And just a technical question, because you didn't, I think I maybe have missed it, but did you mention what language are the films in? Are they in Mixtec or are they in Spanish? Are they subtitled?
Yeah, those are great questions. And so Nudo Mixteco is available on HBO Max, and it's directed by an Indigenous filmmaker who does very much community-centered filmmaking and has been working since 1990, challenging Indigenous representations. And some of her films have obtained national acclaim by the institutes in Mexico there. They also deal with sensitive themes of domestic violence and intergenerational trauma. And I think the idea really is to promote to make it more accessible to more audiences. And I think also that it was undergoing film festivals and screened at different famous acclaimed film festivals, which I think is the work that Angeles Cruz has been doing for the last at least probably 10, 15 years, because she's been writing and she's been directing and producing films, and also really from a community-centered lens. So the language of the film is in Spanish, but there are instances in which Angeles Cruz speaks in Mixteco, and there are subtitles for that. The film it included non-expert, non-trained actors, community members from the town, which San Mateo is an imaginary town. It's not a real town. Because usually towns in Oaxaca will have San Mateo, which is a name as a saint, and then and a name. So it's an imaginary town, but I'm pretty sure that it's people from her native community in Tlaxiaco, which is in the Mixtec region close to Nochitlan. And so, yeah, so there are moments in which people are talking in Mixteco. but for the most part, it's in Spanish. There are subtitles in English as well, and in Spanish and for the Mixteco. And yeah, so I think that there's a really thriving scene of community-centered film in Oaxaca. There's a lot of independent film. And then there's also like actresses like Angeles Cruz that also want to push their films to like bigger audiences. And yeah, so it's wonderful. It's really exciting to also like, I'm familiar with some of the work of those people there. And it's also a movement, it's been in the making. So the new generation of community-centered filmmakers in Oaxaca is also like influenced from the older generation. And yeah, so that's like a different history there. And in Tiempo de Lluvia, that film is in, it's in Spanish. I think, so Angeles Cruz is an actress in this film. So instead of a director, she's an actress, which is great. And in the scene and when there's divination, the ritual being pronounced in Mixteco, or the offering also being said in Mixteco, there is translations of that, but that's the only part in Mixteco as well. And the director is Itandeo Jansen, who is a professor of film at University of Edinburgh. Her parents are also scholars in archaeology and Mesoamerican history. So I think it's also like a film that also wants like bigger audiences. It has also gone through different festivals. And yeah, it's exciting. And I think it also reaches generations like me who can watch this. Tiempo de Lluvia is available on YouTube. So yeah, it's exciting. Thank you.